right, we shall begin our lecture today, and today I intend to discuss with you another aspect of the syllabus, that is the uh, the annexation of the hill uh, areas in the Northeast India. Colonial administration we have discussed. Annexation of Assam we have discussed. Now we talk about the annexation of hill areas and the growth of political consciousness. That will be later. Today I will be briefly discussing with you as I said, annexation of hill areas as per the syllabus. So, yeah. So, as we have seen till this far, the British sort of consolidated its power by 1854. And of course, it stretched even beyond that with regard to, with regard to their authority in the region. But by and large, from 1824 to 1854 is the period wherein the British had largely consolidated these areas, as somebody said, right from the Burma region to the Surma region to the, the hill track of the Himalayas in this particular part. So therefore, through this process, the British was also able to reorganize these borders by, we can make an argument by saying, by making and also unmaking of borders which which already existed and did not exist. And many a times, as you know, with all the colonial authorities, most of the cases, these making and unmaking of borders for the purpose of political and economic administration has not always been a happy experience for the people by and large. We have seen in the process, like we discussed yesterday, with regard to various policies that the British was trying to impose, especially on the people it has already captured in terms of its authority, by imposing various forms of restrictions, various forms of natures of taxes, and also by constraining the independence, the liberty of the people. So, so therefore, in the process, the British was also able to define Northeast India, as we discussed yesterday, in terms of its geographical determinant in this particular context. So today we have, we have 8 states in the Northeast region, but what is important is, before the creation of these 8 states in the post-colonial period, this region was, as we have seen, this region was almost seen by the British as a homogeneous entity. So once a border between different existing districts was brought under one administration, then the idea and the question of diversity also emerged. So so therefore, what is important for us to understand is, how has this frontier, how has this idea of frontier known as the Northeast frontier or Northeast region germinated? it germinated, you see, in in one of the American historian scholar, Frederick Jackson Turner. He says frontier theory replaced the so-called germ theory in America. Today, that theory also holds a certain appeal, as we discussed, to the whole process of studying the importance of Northeast region in the political history of the Indian state. So, uh, now, these frontiers, or the study of these frontiers, as we even have this course, Northeast politics, or the political institutions and processes of Northeast India. You know, we as scholars, we have developed this as a growing regional and national process of understanding frontiers and understanding region through the process of decolonization in the second half of the 20th century. And this kind of study of the Northeast region still exists. So what I'm trying to say is that with the British rule over the region, number one is the British consolidated the authority on many of the tribal groups, brought them under certain kind of paternalistic governance, and therefore applying different form of administration through the Scheduled District Act, through the Excluded Area Territory Act, wherein they see these groups as unique and different from the rest. And in the process, as I said, therefore, in the post-colonial period, the study of the Northeast region has become one of the important study of frontiers on the basis of regional perspective and on the basis of national perspective as well. So, you see, how has all this started? We can make this argument by saying that this process started with the British making Assam as the Chief Commissioner's province in 1874. We have already discussed this yesterday. So this Assam, that the British Assam province, or the Chief Commissioner province of Assam, which was created in 1874, was certainly different from the Assam of Brahmaputra Valley of the Ahom period, because at that point of time it comprised of 6 districts, like Galpara, Kamrup, Darang, Nowgong, Sibsagar, Lakhimpur, which means largely the Brahmaputra Valley. However, you see, the government of India, through the proclamation of 6 February 1874, it created new province called as Assam province by adding new districts to the already existing 6 districts. Districts like Kachar, Garo Hills, Khasi Jaintia Hills, and Naga Hills. All these were then brought together under one Assam province, under one under one administration. So, along with this, another very important aspect was the addition of Sylhet, under the Assam administration in the same year, in the month of September. So, as if with this process, the British thought that they are yet to complete their process of consolidating these areas, and therefore, in the later year, they also added Lushai Hills to it. And this is, you can say, the beginning of the political geography of the region from the basis of its social and historical roots, which means, far from considering the cultural roots of the people, far from considering the the natural history or the kind of environment in which the people lived, the British was more concerned about imposing their authority on the people of the region by bringing in all these varieties of social groups into one political domain, into one political authority. So, so therefore, what happens is, with this exercise of the British, we can say that this also led to the beginning of the change of political geography, which results also in the change of mindset. In the change of mindset. This wouldn't have been possible, definitely, had it not been through the diktat of colonialism, imperialism, in the entire history of British. This kind of imperial expansion and their unfettered prerogative to make or to bring about provincial boundaries throughout their regions, throughout the places where they rule, including India. This is one of the, as I said, one of the exercises which has created, made and also unmade borders. So, of course, towards to this exercise of the British, there were, of course, certain protesters, especially various constituencies, did not appreciate the diktat of 1874, that is the creation of the amalgamation of unwilling units, especially Sylhet becoming part of Assam, Kachar becoming part of Assam province, and then mixing or consolidating all these regions with the hill tribes. So people like J.B. Bhattacharjee, our former first Vice Chancellor, historian himself, he said that these regions would have been better to have been kept with Bengal province itself, because they form part of the natural environment where they can coexist with within the Assam province. However, as I said, the diktat of 1874 also created such amalgam of unwilling units, and they had to for some time coexist. So therefore, while every groups were committed to the idolatry, or they were committed to their own geography, like the tribes were committed, or the tribes had affiliation, or they feel more safe, secured in the hill terrains. Those from Kachar, they feel more safe and secured in Kachar. Those from Golpara and so on and so forth, they have their kind of commitment, they have the kind of feeling of belongingness to these regions. Yet, as I said, the British created this artificial administrative construct, or they created this artificial boundary for the purpose of their administration, while nothing like emotional unity among the constituent actually existed. So it seems as though every unit had a silent but strong resolve not to belong to this new idea of Assam as created by the Britishers. So this is the first point that I'm trying to make. I hope you are able to understand. So in simple language, what I'm trying to say is, although the Britishers consolidated these areas, but bringing them all under one administration was something that the British thought would help them in their administrative processes and affairs. Yet the units or the groups, social groups that came from different background, like the Lushai, the Khasis, the Jaintias, the Garos did not feel as if they could belong to this new region called the Assam province, where Sylhet, Kachar, Golpara, and so many of these regions were clubbed together. That is point number one. So now the question is how these constituents actually came to be clubbed together. Let us discuss these in a very short, very briefly. We have already pointed out that Britishers were able to enter the northeast region. They were able to enter Assam because of the cauldron in Ahom kingdom, and also because of the the invasion of the Burmese, wherein in the clash between the Ahom and the Burmese, the beneficiary or the British benefited from it, and they came to rule this region. On the other hand, in the Kachar region, before that, the Burmese army also had targeted the Manipur kings and murdered, pilgrimage, and later they also undertook the exercise of capturing the king of Kachar. So all these made it possible for the Britishers to come and intervene as a powerful force. Now, with all this, gradually we have seen the British consolidated their power and their authority, and they kept imagining that these regions have to be consolidated in order that there is no further interference by the outside forces. So, therefore, while the Britishers were concerned about all these happening in the region, although, as I said yesterday, these are not very difficult areas for the British, yet their government, especially the British government, was always determined to capture, especially the neighboring hill tribes, and that is primarily because of the mutual hostility. As we have seen, the tribes kept coming down and plundering, and the British was determined to undo these exercises by the tribal population. So nearest to the seat of the company government in Guwahati were located the Jaintia Hills. So Jaintia Hills is very close to the government, the British government in Guwahati. So therefore, the British taking advantage of the fluid situation during the operation against the Burmese, as I said, seeing that the British were only concerned while they were attacking the Burmese, they were concerned about only pushing back the Burmese. The Jaintia kings, the Raja of Jaintia Hills, he was interested in showing his authority, and therefore he set up a border post at a place known as Chaparmukh in Naugong. That is, that is the stretch of the territory of the Jaintia kingdom at that point of time. To this, the British protested, and they repeatedly gave instruction to withdraw this outpost. or the border posts. However, to make the matter worse, under his orders, 3 British subjects were sacrificed at the shrine of Kali. You must understand that the Jaintia king the Jaintia king were worshippers of Kali and Durga, and at that point of time they also practiced human sacrifice. So the Raja of Jaintia had to face the charge for this, of the charge of complicity, and and therefore under pressure to hand over those responsible for this outrage, the British asked the Raja of Jaintia either he should surrender those people or face the consequences. But the Raja of Jaintia Hills ignored. He kept on ignoring this, this threat call or warning by the Britishers. After 2 years, the British troops, then what happened is they occupied Jaintia territory, and following the annexation, following this conflict between the Raja of Jaintia Hills or the Jaintia Kingdom, the annexation of Jaintia Hills took place, and the Raja was pensioned off. He was given some pension, and he was taken to Sylhet, where he made his residence. That is the first stage in which the British had, entered into the hills and annexed this region. And these stories I'm making it short. After having captured Jaintia Hills, the British were now considering a direct communication between Guwahati in the Brahmaputra Valley to Kachar and Sylhet in the Sarna Valley, which means they wanted to build a road between this region. So the existing road from Guwahati to Silchar is, the product of this exercise of the Britishers. So now, after, with this intention, the Britishers, therefore, they see an opportunity of, again extending their territory to the Khasi Hills. To the beyond Jaintia Hills, now come Khasi Hills, which is now in Meghalaya. So what the Britishers did, they persuaded the Raja of Nong Khao, who was strongly against the British at that point of time. His name is Tirot Singh, and some other Khasi chiefs, especially the chief of Shillong province, the Shillong kingdom at that point of time, and of course others. So they persuaded this Raja of Nong Khao and other Khasi chiefs to allow them to construct a road across the hills to connect these two valleys. As I said, the Guwahati Silchar, the current Guwahati Silchar road. So while the work for this, what happened was, while many other chiefs they agreed, Tirot Singh, he kept on insisting that he is just the custodian of administration, and he has no authority over the land. So therefore, he insisted to David Scott at that point of time and his officers that he cannot decide on this matter. So a council had to be called of all the elders of his territory, of his kingdom, and this council lasted for 3 days. This council lasted for 3 days because, as I said, Tirot Singh did not see himself as the owner, or he did not see himself as the as somebody who can decide on the matters of land, because he is just the ruler on the basis of the will of the people. So while the work was so finally after the council, it was agreed that the Britishers can construct a road in his territory, while at the same time the British will have to help him in reclaiming a territory in the war in the Sylhet area. Sorry, not Sylhet area, in the other parts of the present day Bangladesh. So the Britishers seem to have agreed. Later it is interpreted that maybe the interpreter who was sent by the Britishers to speak to the chiefs and to speak to the elders in the council, maybe he must have misinterpreted the agreement. But a document was signed in which the Britishers will help Tirot Singh in his interest, while the Britishers can also pursue with their interest of building a road in his territory. However, while the work was in progress, the Khasis were provoked into a rising or an uprising in 1829. That is, as I said, primarily because while the work was going on, Tirot Singh went to Raja of Rani in the war, and he claimed the territory as promised by the Britishers, but the Raja of Rani actually protested, and when he sought the help of the Britishers did not come to his rescue. He appealed to them number of times, even through his legal aid, yet the Britishers did not come to his rescue. That resulted in him revolting against the Britishers, and as I mentioned, in 1829, during the construction of the road, 2 senior British officers and some sepoys were murdered, and this led to military operation which lasted for 4 or 5 years. So the Khasi chiefs, under the intrepid leadership of Tirot Singh, held out in the hills for about 4 years. But and the Britishers went on an offensive. So they burned down villages. They tortured women, children. They burned down the crops, and to the extent that with all these adversities, Tirot Singh felt so bad for his people that he surrendered himself, and there was a trial, and he was deported to Dhaka on pension again, where he died in 1835. So so in 1825, with his death, or with his demise, the resistance also collapsed, and the British conciliated or made peace with other Khasi chiefs and promised them some customary rights and privileges, and they took possession of the territory in the Khasi Hills. So from 1835, the Khasis and the Jaintias came under the regular administration of of the district officer, called as the political agent by the Britishers. So apart from this, there was also a brief interlude where there was an uprising by the Sintengs, or by another section of the present-day Jaintia Hills, the Sintengs, which had a stronghold in Jowai, and in this particular area, there was a person known as Kyang Nangba, who was leading this movement, and in 1862 there was an uprising, as I said, and the Khasi and Jaintia Hills district gave no cause for worry to the Britishers, except Kyang Nangba, who fought till the end, and finally he was he was beheaded as rebel to the British rule. Now, After all this has already happened, the next region was the Garo Hills, the same hill terrain, So the Garo Hills in the west drew attention of the government of the Bengal following some disputes that was raised by some zamindar of the present day Singh district in 1846. So in 1846 there was some complaint, dispute by some zamindar of Singh district. So though no part of Garo Hills was given in permanent settlement to any landholder from Singh, some portion of the hills in the south was sought to be grabbed by landholders from Singh, and this led to a conflict, as I said, because this kind of grabbing of land was anyway questionable. So the hill tribe successfully scuttled the deal, but there were regular complaints of incursion from Garo Hills. So therefore the tribes, the hill tribes, as I said, faced this problem of incursion from the Garo Hills time and again, and they did not respond favorably to the policy of non-interference. They did not have any. They did not have any relationship with the Britishers. But in 1866, the Garo Hills was partially brought under the British control because of all these conflict, and the British had to intervene, and therefore ultimately they came under in 1866 they came under British control, and soon the British secured the allegiance of more and more villages. So it was village wise, because the Garo Hills they have what is known as a different kind of administration, where the headman is or where the chief is the final authority of that particular province. So the chief is usually the chief of his own village or his own territory, small territory, and this is how the British was able to get the allegiance of one village after another, while promising them better administration and so on and so forth. So the Garo Hills were organized into districts with headquarters in Tura, quarters at Tura in 1869. Of course, some remote villages refused to fall in line, and whenever they got chance, they attacked public servants and protected their own villages. So in 1872, there was an organized expedition, and this swept away the remaining resistance, even from the side of the Garo Hills. So Patogan was one of the tribal chiefs who rebelled against the Britishers, and he is known today as the freedom fighters. Now, after the Garo Hills was done, now the next region is the annexation of Nagaland. The annexation of Nagaland was, or Naga Hills, let's not say Nagaland, Naga Hills was a gradual process. Naga is a generic term, and it includes as many major tribes, as many as 16 major tribes and many other minor tribes. So the British policy towards the Nagas had taken shape over a long period of time. We have already partly discussed that yesterday. So first of all, the Britishers, they used the policy of control from without, and the administration were able to control the Naga tribes, particularly the Angami, through the retaliatory expedition into their villages. So time and again, whenever the Angamis was rebelling against the Britishers, they would retaliate. And between 1835 and 1851, there were 10 such military operations that were conducted by the Britishers, and all, but these did not have the desired effect, or which means this did not resulted in the British gaining from it. So in 1851 alone, as many as 55 persons were killed, 10 were wounded, and 113 carried off into capacity, which means captured by the Britishers. The government then switched over to a different policy of control from within. Earlier control from without, now control from within. And what is this? This is through this policy, the British set up outposts inside Naga Hills. They set up their outposts in Naga Hills, and this policy tended to provoke than to pacify the tribes. The tribe was even more aggressive after this policy of the Britishers. The British government then resolved to try out two prolonged strategy of non-interference and, as I said yesterday, the carrot and stick approach, which means whenever they are whenever they are complying to the Britishers, they are being nice to them. Whenever or they give them carrots, whenever they are rebelling against the Britishers, then they use the stick, which means they retaliate. So this policy also did not work. From 1854 to 1865, there had been 19 Angami raids in which 232 British subjects had been killed, wounded, and carried off. Finally, in 1866, the British took possession of the Angami territory, and subsequently, as can be expected, the hills inhabited by the Lothas and the Ao tribes were also put under their control. So, although this constituted into a British in 1866, formal steps for the annexation of Naga Hills were taken in 1874, after, as I told you, after the creation of Assam province. And this was a time, this was also the year when the Secretary of State concurred with the suggestion to move, the district headquarters farther into the heart of the hill, and therefore keeping Kohima as the choice. And within a short time, Kohima prospered as a district town of the Naga Hills. So with the creation of Kohima as the district capital, the British means they have entered deep inside the Naga Hills. Now coming to the Lushai. Lushai is also another major tribes among the Mizos. So we talk about the Mizos instead. So their first contact with the British was from the western side, not from the eastern side, of course from this side, from Kachar area and all that. After the latter, they set up military post at Chittagong. Yes, Chittagong. So earlier when I talked about Tirap Singh also, I was talking about Chittagong. So like the Nagas, the Lushais were also known for their incursions into Kachar and Sylhet. They were known for their expedition and raids into the plains, just like any other tribal groups. So expeditions were were launched against them from time to time, by the Britishers. Then there was negotiation concluded, but there was no respite from the raids of the tribes. So because peace with the chiefs of one clan was not binding on the other clan, or not agreement with one Xylo is not applicable to another Xylo or another chief. So if peace was made with one group, another group started attacking. So therefore acquisition of knowledge of firearms also reached the Lushai from about 1850s, and using firearms they also continued the raid from the hills, and all the more aggressively and more deadly. So therefore there were 3 expeditions against the Lushai in 1871, 72, 1888 to 89, and 1889 to 1890. And with these expeditions, the British established their rule in the North Lushai Hills in 1890. So the South Lushai Hills, was organized into another separate district the next year, and it was governed from Bengal. So formal annexation of the hills was made in 1895, and the North and the South district were amalgamated in 1898, and they were placed under Chief Commissioner of Assam, and therefore from the years that from 1950, district came to be known as Mizo Hills district, which means after independence, this was known as the Mizo Hills district. So therefore, we can see that the annexation of the Garo, the Naga, the Lushai by the British was a violation, in fact, of the Queen's Proclamation of 1858, which promised an end of era of expansion of empire in India. Yet the British continued their expedition, their annexation in the northeast India, and this may be credited with several counts of successes and administrative skill, of course. But as I said from the very beginning, this led to the drawing of borders among many districts, and bringing them together, and therefore this also led to a lot of crisis in the northeast region. Okay, so let me stop here. Of course, I want to discuss many other things, but let me stop here for this particular class. So thank you very much. If you have any question, please kindly address to me now.